Good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Greenleaf. I'm the director at Innovation Catalyst, which is within the Georgia CTSA. And this is our last Bench2Market talk for the semester. And it's probably the one that most people are interested in, which is finding money, securing investment for your startup, what savvy biotech and healthcare VCs care about. The Bench2Market talk is sponsored by Biolocity, the Georgia Tech Pettit Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience, and the Georgia CTSA. Just a couple announcements before I turn it over to Cindy Sendell to lead our panel today. First is legal office hours. This is offered by the Emory Law School and Dr. Nicole Morris, and this is in partnership with Biolocity. So if you have a legal question about your startup, you are welcome to schedule an appointment at the link below from the Biolocity website. It's a great free resource. Next is a very similar but more commercial oriented is innovation office hours, also offered by the great team at Biolocity. And this is also free. You are welcome to contact them regarding any of the items here below: clinical need, pitch deck, milestone creation, etc. For funding, there's an important announcement that is evergreen currently. This is with BARDA. This is the BARDA Drive program. BARDA is a program that focuses on protecting the U.S. from chemical and terrorist threats, but they do a lot of funding in for diagnostics and other work in the biomedical space. You can contact the Biolocity team if you think you have a product that might fit any of these particular areas on the left. Finally, if you are looking for laboratory space, if you are a company that needs a startup home that is not your home address, you are welcome to apply for Lab to Launch. This is capital efficient, aka cheap, subsidized space by the Emory School of Medicine that is based in the Health Science Research Building 2 on the Emory campus. If you're interested in learning more about that space, you can email labtolaunch@emory.edu. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Sendell to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Morgan. So we have a great panel today, and we're going to be focusing on, as Morgan said, something that I think is going to be of interest to a lot of people, and that is how to fund your startup. And we decided to have folks on the panel that can talk to both non-dilutive and dilutive funding. So we have Justin Burns from GRA, Ashley Cornelison from Portal Innovations, Courtney Law from Biolocity, and we also have Tom Saylor, who is a serial entrepreneur and can talk from the side of companies that have raised successful funding in the past, different and strategies for strategically raising money. So I thought that what we could do to start with is just go around to each one of our panelists and just have them introduce themselves and just talk briefly, about their organization. So why don't we start with Justin? Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Cindy. So I'm Justin Burns. I'm a scientist by training. I say recovering scientist. I've been away from the bench for quite some time. I started my career at Georgia Tech, did both my degrees there, Ph.D. in molecular and microbiology. Transitioned away, did some application-focused research for the Navy, came back and worked at Emory, both as a researcher and left the bench to work in Emory's tech licensing office, where I moved sort of slowly through the ranks, and then departed and spent about 3 years at a Boston-based venture fund. I recently joined the Georgia Research Alliance to take over what was previously known as the Ventures Program. So this is our grants and loans program designed to get technologies off the ground and out of the university. So again, I've been here about 2 months. And thanks, Cindy, for the invitation.
Thanks, Justin. Let's go next with Courtney.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Courtney Law, the Managing Director of Biolocity. I'm also a recovering researcher. So my background is in pharmaceutical science. I did both my undergrad and graduate degrees at UNC Chapel Hill. But since leaving the bench, excuse me, I've worked with early stage startups from folks outside of internally to the institution and outside of the institution, not only connecting them to resources, but building strategic plans for how to continue to support ecosystems broadly. Most recently, I joined Biolocity about 3.5 years ago. So we are here primarily to work with entrepreneurs out of Emory and Georgia Tech to support them through commercialization of their health-related technologies. But we have several other resources to connect folks with, so we're always happy to chat anytime.
Ashley, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks, Cindy. I'm Ashley Cornelison with Portal Innovations. I'm the executive director. Been there now about 3 months. Very excited to be entering Atlanta market with Portal, which will be offering venture capital as well as infrastructure for startup companies coming primarily out of the universities that need wet lab space or dry lab space. In addition, my prior life, I was at the Georgia Research Alliance for 12 years previously, working with the commercialization program and faculty members, as well as the tech transfer offices of the universities to help commercialize technologies.
Thank you, Ashley. Tom.
All right, well, Tom Saylor. I'm a Georgia Tech graduate. After Georgia Tech went to Europe. I was in a doctoral program in neuroscience at the Max Planck Institute, then went to Harvard Business School, did an MBA, and I've spent past 30 years in a range of entrepreneurial ventures spread across the world from the US, Europe, and Asia. Built 6 companies, all of which went to successful exit, except the first, but that's probably one of the most valuable lessons is the ones that didn't make it. But currently involved with as advisor to GRA. I'm on the GTRC board, and where we have a small venture fund that I'm investment advisor to, and I advise a number of early stage companies around the Atlanta area.
Great, thanks, Tom. I thought that I have a few questions that I've written down to kind of start the conversation. So I think we'll start there, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions that they might have for our panelists. So first off, I'd like to talk to Justin a little bit, because Justin, GRA is usually the first money in for many of our startups. So can you tell us what you're looking for in those startups that you fund?
Yeah, sure. So the startup, I think, is a broad enough term for us. I mean, we're happy to fund technologies. So these are things that could even be pre-company, and importantly for GRA, we don't need a company to be formed to fund the work that needs to go on. That being said, as our name suggests, the Georgia Research Alliance funds only those opportunities coming from Georgia, and especially those coming out of the Georgia universities. So we'd like to see, technologies and researchers at the universities here in Georgia. If you have an idea, have something, it could be pre-patent, it could be pre-company. What we really look for is the opportunity to move to the market. So a clear unmet need. We don't want to solve something that's either has good solutions on the market or may have a tough barrier to entry. We want to see new and cool technology coming out. We do fund things a little bit later than that, so we can generate proof of principle data to help you sort of apply for next generation funding. So things like SBIRs or other translational funding sources. Our earliest grants are smaller in dollar, but obviously more impactful. Like Cindy said, we are first money in, often, augmenting, federal research dollars, or if you have a special project that is, in need of some augmenting funding, that's a good opportunity for GRA to hear your story. We are pretty technology agnostic. So it could be life sciences, it could be hard tech, it could be software, medical device, any of the above. So we take all comers.
Great. So I said startup. So let me define what I mean by a startup, because it means different things. We think of it in Venture Lab at Georgia Tech. We think of that as a temporary organization that's trying to figure out whether they have a business model. So that's, when I said startup, I didn't mean an incorporated company. So when you see a lot of these grant proposals, particularly for phase one, Justin, and is there anything that folks can do to give themselves a better chance of getting GRA funding?
Yeah, I think, a few things we look for is, like I said, a sort of unmet market need. We do consider this translational or commercialization funding. So we're not looking to fund things that are sort of really on the basic science side. That being said, there are things that are a little bit too early for us. We prefer to fund things that sort of have a clear a path forward. We don't want to sort of say, oh, I have an idea, I want to make a new vaccine. Can you fund that? Well, we need a little bit more than that, right? We like to sort of understand where you're going. If you have expertise in the area, we do look for the opportunity to generate intellectual property. So we want to have the technology be protectable in some way. That being said, it doesn't have to already be protected. So you don't need a disclosure or don't need a patent filed. And intellectual property could be more than just patents. We do like, the idea of software or data moats, things that can give you some protection in the market. So as long as those things are hit, and again, sort of based out of a Georgia university, we'd be happy to take a look.
Do you think it's helpful for folks who have done some customer discovery before they submit a GRA proposal?
Yeah, I think that really helps. It certainly can give a leg up. Again, sort of identifying the unmet need in the market, you sort of identify who may be the buyers. If it's a software product, we understand sort of what that path might be. Is it a business to business model? Or is it a direct to consumer software play? If you're looking to develop a new therapeutic, making sure that the indication, you have enough patients, or that there's not already, newly approved drugs on the market for the same indication. A lot of those things can sort of help you give it a leg up in those proposals.
Yeah, I'd like to give a plug for I-Core Sites program. There is one at UGA, there's one at Georgia Tech, and maybe Emory has one too. And this is where you can get a little bit of training in customer discovery and then get a $3,000 grant to go out and go to a conference, let's say, that has a lot of, an industry component, and talk to a lot of people at one time. And really, I think that doing that prior to, in my experience, prior to the GRA phase one is kind of helpful too, I think, to write a better proposal. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that. And if anybody—
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it really helps, sort of get you out of that thinking around basic science. Science for science's sake is great, but I think all of us here on the panel and hopefully everyone in attendance, are thinking about how to get the products into the market.
Courtney, maybe you can talk a little bit next, because I often think of this as kind of GRA and then kind of Biolocity, I don't know, in my mind. Can you talk a little bit about the types of technologies that you invest in, the size of your investment, and the application process, which is pretty unique? And then you're more than just money, right? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. And I always love going after GRA because there are a lot of things that are very similar. So Justin said, I think most of their requirements are our requirements as well, except at our stage, we are looking for folks that have at least made a disclosure to either Emory or Georgia Tech. And as Justin mentioned, not everything is patentable. We also look at software, et cetera. But at least we want to know that folks have made that interaction with their tech transfer office. As far as the types of technologies we are looking at things affecting human health. So that's everything from therapeutics to medical devices, like I said, software products. We have things in like cell manufacturing, kind of all across the board. And we are looking at, like Justin said, similar kind of stage. So we're past the research stage. There's something there that we think, or at least that the inventors think, may have some product market fit for commercial viability. At that point, they get to chat with us a little bit more. So we're actually happy to chat with any project team any time of the year. We have pro bono consulting, but our funding cycle only occurs once a year. So typically we open our funding cycle in late fall, so the end of October. And that's the beginning of our official scouting process, which lasts about 2 months. So typically we see about, I would say, around 50 to 60 different technologies a year. But our actual application process is by invitation only. By the time we start inviting folks, I would say we are inviting about 25 of those teams to move forward in our funding cycle. Our funding cycle is a little bit different than other granting organizations because we are pretty hands-on. So we're a hybrid model of looking at each technology as a grant, but also we use kind of a VC style triage process to evaluate these technologies. I know because it's a little bit different than other groups, folks are often wondering why we have this process, but part of it is there's an educational component to it, as well as our team is working with each of the teams in the funding cycle to, I guess, put their best foot forward with our external oversight committee. So we're working with the teams to talk about like that product market fit. What is the best positioning for their technology that we can see at this point through the commercial process, and even thinking through that long-term strategy and what other resources they need to augment our funding. As Cindy mentioned, we like to say that we are funding plus. So we do offer grants, and the grant size ranges. We actually ask folks to propose a budget, a 12-month budget that will actually help them meet a key value inflection point. For us, that looks like, what is the point that you need to get to in about a 12-month period to not only de-risk you, but make you more attractive to future funding, whether it's additional GRA funding, maybe eventually some portal funding, or other fundings or partnerships, et cetera. So what's actually moving that technology forward? A lot of times this is an iterative process that we are talking through, again, as a group, as we are going through the funding cycle. But we really are here to kind of help de-risk those technologies. So at the end, so I guess, like I said, this is about a 6-month process. We fund about 5 to 7 project teams. And the total funding amount can range to typically around $1.5 million spread out over those companies or projects.
Oh, thanks. That's great. And I have mentored, many teams that have gone through Biolocity, and I will say that the ones that have been selected to move forward in the application process, even if they don't get the funding at the end, there's still enormous value in just going through the process because you guys provide so much great input. That's really helpful. And then teams can, reapply the following year. But I just think that, the advice that they get just going through the process is really invaluable. Courtney, can you talk about, I think there's like a new university mentor program that you guys are rolling out, or can you talk to that? Or am I wrong?
Well, I will say that we are in discussions of how to expand our mentoring network. So for us, we have 3 core experts and residents that have different verticals of expertise, whether it's medical device, therapeutics, and more of that product market fit. We're working with folks like with Morgan and the CTSA and other folks within the School of Medicine to identify additional EIRs or consultants that can work with teams. We also have I would say a growing network of more specific expertise, whether it's regulatory or even quality management systems, et cetera, to help with teams along the way.
Thank you. I think moving along here from so far, all the folks that we have talked to, they provide grants, so money in the form of grants, and these are great, right? Because they're non-dilutive, and they are all pretty much pre-company formation. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk about dilutive funding. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about Portal Innovations, what you guys offer, which also is in addition to just money, it's a lot more than that. Can you talk about Portal Innovations program, maybe a little bit about why you guys came to Atlanta, what you offer and the types of things that you invest in? Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to. So Portal started in Chicago and looks at emerging markets for entry. So looking at those emerging markets, one of their kind of thesis behind that is what type of university research do they have going on? What type of federal funding is going into the state? So, Georgia has a really good foundation already with our research universities that are here, with a really strong scientists, with a lot of federal funding that's going into here. So the ability to really translate that technology and have really great intellectual property coming out was one of the reasons that Portal started looking at the Atlanta market. Also, what are the other ecosystem players that are here? There is a better potential for success having things like GRA and Biolocity funding where, other states don't have non-dilutive funding like that available. So that's an additional resource that was intriguing to Portal for looking at coming into the Atlanta market. We do have infrastructure that I talked about that's being built here later this year that will be open, that will have laboratory space, including dry lab space and wet lab space. One of the things about the Portal kind of Atlanta office, which is interesting, is that we will have designated dry lab component, wherein Portal's kind of bread and butter up in Chicago and our other offices have been in life science and therapeutics. So mostly wet lab space. Here with the engineering schools that we have and just looking at the startups that have come out, we're also dedicating a lot of resources as well as potential funding for technologies that we see in device, diagnostics, anything kind of in med tech sector as well, which is kind of a new thing for Portal. So as soon as I started joining, I started at Portal, I started talking to them about, what the scene looks like here and making sure that device and med tech was on their radar. So as far as what we invest in here, we will invest in any of those. Anything I would say that addresses an unmet need in healthcare is what we're looking for. Generally, we invest at the seed stage level. So somewhere when companies are raising a seed round and around the 2 to 10 range, Portal is interested in knowing about them. What we'd like to see out of those companies generally would be that they're incorporated, they have a full-time management team, they've filed for intellectual property, they have validated the core technology, and then we also look at the timeline for a reasonable exit, and what is the path and trajectory for follow-on funding and the next phases of financing. So that's kind of the basics that we look for. We invest about $250,000 to $500,000 in the seed round. The way that Portal is structured, we have a Chicago office, Boston office, Houston office, Atlanta office, and hopefully expanding to the West Coast next year. And with that, each office has its own kind of off-balance sheet fund for investment. Here in Atlanta, our fund is about $5 million, so not a huge fund, which is why we're kind of doing that $250,000 to $500,000 range. But Portal at the national level is also raising a momentum, what we call the Momentum Fund, which is a later stage Series A and B investment rounds. And they would be able to continue investing for those companies that we've invested at the local level in the seed stage. That fund has closed on about $20 million of financing right now with an open target. So there is, Portal itself is about 3 years old as an organization, brand new in Atlanta. But we are trying to kind of fill that entire, funding pipeline here, kind of seed stage through later stage financing as well. It is a traditional private equity fund. that I think we will do convertible debt, but we will not invest in safe rounds. We want to have it as a priced round. We don't typically lead rounds either, just because our check size is small. However, one of the things I also started talking pretty significantly to Portal when I joined is that there's not a lot of leads in the Southeast, and especially in Georgia in the life sciences industry. So, you know, we do have the ability to lead rounds. We have the team, we have the expertise based out of our Chicago office to, you know, do the diligence on it and set those valuations. So there is potential for us to do so if in the case that it makes sense or there's a lot of interest for Portal in doing so. We're currently just got approval from our investment committee to lead our first deal here in Atlanta. So I'm very excited about that. I think we just offered them a term sheet. So hopefully that will be our first one that we can announce soon that we're investing in here in Georgia of about $500,000. So we're really excited about that, really looking forward to that. We do have a cohabitation policy. So companies that we invest in, we also want to house in our incubator space. So that way we really, our theory and philosophy is that we live with our investments. So we really want to be sure that we're helping them to the best of our abilities. So that is a little bit kind of about Portal on the investment side. And additionally to the investment arm, I mentioned the infrastructure, but we're also providing programming to companies that are in our space. You do not have to be an investment company to be in our space. We're probably looking at companies in our space that are about, you know, post-university incubator. So maybe they are looking to do a seed round, they've raised a C round, they've raised an A round. They want to get out of that university setting and come to kind of, you know, a space where they can be part of a community that will be dedicated within, you know, healthcare, medical care, and life sciences. So, you know, we're hoping that by filling our facility with a lot of these startup companies, it will create a collaborative environment in this community of startups. And additionally, we'll have programming running monthly to really, you know, provide access to resources for those companies, as well as, you know, elevating their technologies. One of the things that Portal does pretty frequently is this biotech bites, where we take presentations and companies from each of our cities that Portal is in and showcase it to investors nationally. So we just had one last week where we had 3 or 4 companies from Atlanta, and on there was 50 investors nationally. So really looking at the scene here, we want our companies to be successful. So how do we elevate them and showcase them to investors across, you know, not just Georgia, not just the Southeast, but really elsewhere. And that's where I think leveraging our other sites is really beneficial to kind of that connectivity.
Great, super exciting. So we're so happy to have a Portal in Atlanta. So this really does add to our ecosystem here. So thank you so much, Ashley, and we're so delighted to have you as the new executive director. Can you say a little bit more? So Portal, again, it's more than money. It's also space. It's also, you know, you provide a lot more in terms of programming. Do you, when you invest in companies, do you take a board seat?
I would say not typically, unless we're leading that round. So in the one that we are leading, we will be asking for a board seat in that case. But I think it is, you know, dependent on the investment.
And finally, how do companies reach out to you? How do you find new companies, and how, you know, how do we make that, how do they make that connection with you?
Yeah, so we'll have open doors soon, but they can reach out to me via email. I'm always happy to connect and talk with companies about what we have. I love to introduce companies to our ventures team, again, which is based out of Chicago. So I want to see an active, deal flow here. I want to make sure that we're elevating those Atlanta companies. It will be probably a lot of companies that come out of the GRA and Biolocity pipeline. So, continuing to work closely with both Courtney and Justin on what they're developing within their pipelines. And then, we're not just university companies as well. So that's probably what we would primarily see, I would think, in this space. But companies, are free to reach out to me by whatever means possible. And then I'm happy to, connect them with our right group. And one program that I didn't mention, Cindy, would be our EXQ program, which is a fractional management talent program that we do have as well. So companies that are members in our space are also eligible. We have a kind of consultant based out of our Chicago office that has a repository of all of these kind of national managers. And so these are fractional CFOs, CEOs, et cetera, that, if there is the right timing and opportunity and connectivity, then they can, she can make those introductions and facilitate that so that they have access to people when they need them.
Oh, that's great, because we do have, and that's one of the things that we have a shortage of in the Atlanta area are, experienced entrepreneurs and C-suite folks and that type of business expertise. So that's really great. Moving on to Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, can you talk from the other end? So from as a serial entrepreneur, can you talk a little bit about the elements of a strategic funding plan? How do you, because there's all different types of funders out there.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that, the pros and cons of, the different types of?
The first thing I would say is maximize the non-dilutive funding that you can get access to, because the key in the funding process is tangible validation points, if you want to call that, or value points. Using the example of drug development, for example, getting solid animal studies, good animal model, and so on, having IP, clear IP understanding, using ICOR, other similar programs, and so on, to understand what the market is, understanding the competitive landscape, and so on. So as much of this that you can do before you actually start to approach serious venture investors and so on, one, the likelihood that you're going to get funding is improved, and secondly, you can strengthen the valuation and that you would seek to get at your first round of funding. The second thing is that in many cases you can look at unpriced rounds, safe notes. If and it talks to the issue of valuation, that very often in the early rounds you don't know what the value of the company is, and one of the ways of going about addressing this uncertainty in valuation is through convertible notes, or safe notes is a standard format and so on that's used. It allows you to sidestep the issue of what the valuation is, where the valuation will be set at future rounds of funding. From the standpoint of type of investors to look at, most early stage companies, if is really going to go through, I would say, seed type investors, angel investors, some cases family offices, and there are various ways of actually going about that. There's now well-established online ways of actually identifying who are investors in these categories and reaching out to those investors, finding out who's investing in your space and what level of investment they're making. Are they lead investors? And that's one of the key things too, is that very often you may find people that are willing to put up money, but they're looking for someone that's going to established known investor that will act as a lead investor in the space. In some cases, you can go to mainstream investors. I think Portal is a very interesting strategy because I think Portal will invest at the early stage potentially and provides a lot of value added in terms of expertise. And there are groups around similar to Portal and so on that play a similar function. Going to the larger mainstream VCs, generally they're looking for more mature opportunities. And this is when I think about the bigger venture capital firms and look in the context of drug development, they're really looking to fund companies that are ready to go into the clinic at the very least, or have early clinical stage data and so on. So, summarizing, I'd say focus on non-dilutive funding to reach the milestones that you can in terms of development before going out. Secondly, the looking for and researching who are sort of early stage investors that have experience in investing in your space, and trying to be conscious of the value points that you could create through the investment at various stages. What do you expect to achieve through their investment? Where can you get to that's going to make an attractive investment for the next stage of investor?
Great. Tom, can you comment on angel networks and the pros and cons of that type of
the angel networks, there is a large body of investors that I would call sort of angel investors. Some are more sophisticated than others. In some cases, they're just small angel groups that have limited capability of doing due diligence. In other cases, Keiretsu being an example, they have an extensive process for due diligence. And as a result of that, they're really looking at a little bit later stage investments, companies that have had maybe friends and family funding and so on, that have established certain value points through the funding, significant value points through the funding to date. I have to say, one of the things of the past couple of years I've been introduced to are some of these online databases like Crunchbase, Founder Suite, and so on, where you can go in and sift through types of investors and really focus in on those that are going to be investing at the level that you're looking for and at the in the sectors and so on. The ideal situation is really having investors that have follow-on capability. That's a downside of very often angel investors and so on. Secondly, next stage investors very often are looking at the quality of your previous investors. And I think the third thing that sometimes can be a disadvantage with seed investors is that many later stage investors don't like a messy cap table. And by that, what I mean that there's a lot of small investors that make up your existing investor network. But having said all of that, seed investors can be an essential source of capital, and you certainly shouldn't ignore it.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Justin, you were in that world too, not angel world, but yeah.
Yeah, no, Tom, those are really good points. And I agree on the sort of messy cap table, but at the end of the day, getting money into the company to keep it going is often the mission. So you take money, you raise money when you need it. Coming from the venture side, I was at a venture fund based again primarily in Boston, and we led rounds all the way from pre-seed through later stage growth and crossover and IPO rounds. The valuation point is well taken. You may not know what the value of the company would be. You can leave that till later, but again, your lead investor will sort of come up with that. I think it's more of an art than a science. But there may be disagreements on what the value is, but at the same time, sort of looking at the dilution you may take in any given round. It's a good point to remember that your lead investor is also the one spending their money on doing the diligence. And so typically smaller investors, since they're writing smaller checks, don't also want to spend, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to conduct due diligence. And have others in the round rely on that. So I think it's a good point to choose your investor as much as the investor may choose you. The online databases are very common now, and you can find investors in the space. You can find, do you want a more generalist investor or do you want something more specialized? And also sort of what the stage of their fund is. Tom's point, again, is well taken on angels and may not be able to follow on in subsequent rounds. You may also have an investor who's at the end of a fund cycle, and so they may not be able to follow on either. So I think you can certainly do your homework on your investors in as much as they will do homework on you. The other thing I think that all of us share is the ability to sort of attract those types of investors. GRA, Biolocity, Portal, we all are, I think, still very early stage, in finding opportunities for companies to have a good set of investors down the road. All of our networks are something we rely on as well. So any of us, as we put money in, want to make sure that the company can be successful, whether it's dilutive or non-dilutive.
Can somebody comment on, because there are a couple of concepts that Tom introduced, safe notes, convertible debts, convertible notes. Can anybody comment on the pros and cons and the differences between those two things? Anybody want to take that?
Sure, I'll take it. So the safe note is a concept introduced by Y Combinator. The SAFE is an acronym for a simple agreement for future equity. And so the idea there is you can get money into the company and get it in fairly quickly without agreeing on what the price is. And so typically, investors who put money in one of these debt-like instruments are rewarded for taking early risk by getting a discount to the next round. So when an investor comes in and prices the round, those investors will convert that early stage funding that comes in the form of a debt into equity, but at a better rate than the investors that are in. So I think they have pros and cons. The SAFE is a fairly easy mechanism. The documents are well established. Companies can use it. Investors who are comfortable with SAFEs, can certainly use it, and there's fairly little negotiation. As Ashley pointed out, I think the downside is that it leaves some open items and maybe a little bit too amorphous for some investors. They don't want to leave that pricing discussion until later. It helps to sort of identify, what value is there, what value can be created, and also, sort of, you may want to sort of think about that as you simplify your cap table, down the road. The convertible debt instrument is a little more sophisticated in that you are agreeing that the money coming in will convert to equity, and you're doing it with a few parameters already known. Usually there is a valuation cap. So it says, investors that come in will convert at a certain rate. A lot of times investors will think of that as sort of pre-pricing the next round. It's not always the case, especially if you're able to be more successful with the money that comes in. And it also sort of, again, contemplates a discount to the next round. And if for some reason the debt doesn't convert, it sort of forms itself into regular debt. And so the investors who put money in terms of debt are higher on the sort of liquidation preference. If the company doesn't sort of have that price round, holding debt is often better than being an equity holder. You get paid out first.
Great job, Justin. I'm glad we all punted to you.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else want to comment on that one?
The only other thing maybe I'll offer there too, Cindy, is that GRA has the ability to offer debt to startup companies as well. So we do offer loans. I think they're not convertible loans, so they're not ideally taking equity, but we do offer up to about $250,000 in loans to companies that have progressed through the GRA system. It's really designed to be a bridge type loan. So when a company has just been formed, or you need some capital before you're ready to go and raise your first round or even get that convertible debt, it's a way to sort of get the flywheel spinning, so to speak. If you needed to go work with a contract manufacturer or contract with somebody to get your first deliverable or sort of prototype or something like that, GRA does make those loans. They're at attractive interest rates, and we do defer some payments on the loans so that the company can use the cash in the best way possible. There are fewer restrictions on those loans. So the loans can go straight to the company, and they're not grants that would otherwise go to the universities to sort of advance the technology. So those loans, can be used to pay, for some IP protection. They can be used to pay salaries. They can be used, again, to sort of contract out with manufacturers or other things. But we do think of those as a bridge loan. To be eligible for the loan, there has to be some likelihood of repayment of the loan. And so we want to see that on the horizon, you have a fundraising round, or you're going to be generating revenue. So all of those things go into consideration. And we do diligence, just like a bank would if they were offering you a loan. So we check things out inside the company. And maybe that's a good segue into sort of preparing to either raise money, is to sort of talk about having all of your ducks in a row as you get the company ready to go and raise. People are going to take a look inside and want to know that they're making a good investment.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for reminding me. That's a really important loan program. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom.
Cindy, I was going to make 2 points and so on that I think might be helpful.
Yeah.
One is I think having communities like Portal is doing at the New Science Aware, and or communities like ATDC that was fostered by Georgia Tech. There's a lot of value, not just in the mentoring, which is important and so on, but the fact that you have a community of people that you can ask other CEOs about what their experience is. Who have you found useful in terms of your network and so on. So, and I had early experience with this because my first companies were at Cambridge, UK, but the Cambridge Science Park was one of the early science parks. And, that culture was invaluable to me as an early stage entrepreneur.
Oh, absolutely, Tom. And I think isn't Portal, are you guys thinking of doing like a CEO roundtable every once in a while? Or that would be.
Yeah, we do have that program. It's actually already started. We're in our first cohort. It's generally 1 quarter long, and it's not a lot to it. It's just show up for lunch, and we'll treat you to lunch. Right now we have about 10 to 12, I think, in the first cohort. And it's great right now because we, in the absence of having kind of our floor available, we're already connecting people, already getting them together at the same dinner table and talking about issues that they are having. And, at what stage did you do this? What was the right path to do that? What resources did you use? And most of what we see here, in Atlanta and Georgia are a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, a lot of first-time CEOs. And so I feel like it's really valuable for those groups, to not only talk to each other, but also to hear from people that have been there and done it. So I think that's really interesting. We have mostly first-time CEOs in this first cohort, but we do have a couple that are kind of that serial entrepreneur. And I think, that's invaluable advice that they provide because they, can tell you about what not to do.
Absolutely. This
And
is a great
Courtney's
conversation.
also got at Emory. I can't remember the name. What are you calling the incubator space?
Yes. So Lab to Launch is new
Lab to
to
Launch.
Emory. Yes. And actually, Morgan's group also puts together an entrepreneurship kind of get together monthly as well. So we are trying to get more folks to, like you said, have those nice collisions, be able to talk about different topics in commercialization, but just know who else is in the community, who else is thinking about these things. Because it's nice to be able to just say, oh, I met so-and-so at this thing, and be able to have those offline conversations as well.
Yeah, that's great.
I'll put in one plug. So the Bio-Entrepreneurship Networking is tomorrow. It's the third Thursday of every month at HSRB 2. If you want to come meet the lovely Dr. Courtney Law in person, she will be our speaker in June. So the third Thursday in June, if you're around, you can come have a glass of wine and talk to her.
Yeah, and another plug right there. If you missed our last night's event of Portal Pours, that's a great event, just getting together, the community ecosystem partners, and anybody that's really interested in entrepreneurship or growing the life sciences industry here. And that's once a month-ish. And that's open to anybody. You can sign up for the Portal newsletters or follow me on LinkedIn or follow Portal. And get notice of those happening on a monthly basis at Science Square.
GRA is often a good parasite to all of these events, and we typically have staff at any of them. So we'd be happy to connect if we see you there as well.
I'd like to turn it over to the audience and see if anybody has any questions for this great panel. The discussion so far has been excellent. Do I have any questions from folks?
While you're fielding kind of questions, Cindy, one thing that I'd like to, just kind of talk about maybe is, going after that venture capital funding. I think that, with a lot of these first-time CEOs, there, isn't really a true understanding of how to go about approaching investors. And I think people like Portal, GRA, Biolocity, we're all like very friendly, especially to, Georgia-based companies. So there is an art to, approaching investors, to getting seed funding. There's an art to, doing a pitch deck. A lot of times, what I've seen in my career is, 40-page slide deck that's heavily scientific, and that's not what investors are looking for. And I feel like there's a really large education component that can be done, in speaking with, first-time entrepreneurs about what that looks like. And I would imagine that Justin, Courtney, myself, Tom are always available if you guys just wanted to run pitch decks by us or talk about what that looks like. Because I think, just making each of our companies successful is really just going to elevate Atlanta and get more interest from investors outside of the city as well.
Thanks. I also want to say that there are a lot of commercialization resources at our universities. So at Georgia Tech, there's Venture Lab and Quadrant I. So I'm a principal on Quadrant I, and we really work with those faculty and graduate students who are interested in commercializing their intellectual property. So I'm always available to talk to people. I am also kind of the liaison to GRA. So life science GRA proposals go through me. I'm also very happy to connect folks to our I-Core Sites program. We also have something called the CreateX Summer Launch, where it's a 12-week program. I know Courtney is involved in that as a mentor, and as am I. That's another great program for at Georgia Tech. So lots of resources, also at Tech, and I'm sure at Emory and as well. So let's see if we have any questions. We have something from Casey Collins. Can you explain what a virtual data room is, how you build one, what it looks like? And also, she says, thanks to all the panelists for their insights. Who would like to take that one? What does a data room look like? What is it, a virtual data room?
Tom, you must have built
I
a few in your
nominated
day.
you. Oh, that's funny. I nominated Justin and Justin nominated Tom. Okay.
Maybe we can tag team. How about that?
Good. Yeah.
I'll start. So generally, when an investor wants to start a due diligence process, they're looking to get all of the information they want in one area rather than receiving it in several piecemeal emails. Oftentimes the information you're sending is confidential, and so you don't want to just put it out on a Google Drive. You want to open this up to specific people, and generally to those people who've shown a real interest. So people who are sort of cursory or maybe have an interest but haven't signed a non-disclosure agreement with your company, generally don't get access to things like company financials or details around other company documents, bylaws, articles of incorporation, those types of things. So what we call a VDR, or virtual data room, is really a repository to put all of those documents in one place and make it as easy as possible for your investor to look through or ask the questions that they may be seeking answers to. There's lots of services out there that offer this. I would dissuade you from using something as simple as a Google Drive. It's often not well organized. There's plenty like DocSend Some of these will allow you to control whether or not the person looking at the documents can download them. They'll add watermarks to the documents for you so that things, can't be sent around and, without your permission. So there's a few offerings out there. Carta is another good resource. Carta is a company that also helps to manage, your share certificates and cap table, and often can incorporate your data room into that as well. So generally speaking, it's just a good place to put everything in one spot. If you want to make it as easy as possible for your investors to find their answers, you'll have a much better interaction with potential investors. And Tom, maybe you have any other thoughts about including things or not including things?
Yeah, no, at various levels, data room is now become pretty essential, but in terms of actually as you go further down the road as a company, understanding how to construct and manage a data room becomes increasingly important, because everything, all the documents that could possibly be relevant to helping an investor become comfortable with your business, both on the scientific front as well as all the legal and employee contracts often go into it, all sorts of legal agreements, background on competitors, your science, your intellectual property, and so on. It's fairly easy to find sort of sample templates of structure and so on that gives you an idea of what's. But it does raise one more question that I'll throw out and see whether my colleagues how they feel. And that's the question. Okay, you want to form a startup. There's several different options. You can actually set up a C Corp, or you can set up an LLC. Quite frankly, all of my companies are C Corps because that's what I've always assumed later stage investors are looking for, a C Corp. But for someone starting up a company, it might be useful just to say a word or two about the form of structure that you might want to pursue.
Can you comment
C-Corp.
more on the pros and cons of C Corp versus LLC? Or is that the C Corp? I can't remember. Yep.
No, it's everything.
Well, just for everybody's benefit, maybe the LLC is sort of a limited liability. It doesn't have shares per se. You have membership interests. So if you and one other founder, sort of want to split this evenly, you can sort of generate an LLC. I think you can get one set up for $100 or so. You go down and file the paperwork with the Secretary of State. My 2 cents is it's just as easy to get documents ready for a C Corp. It positions you well. It shows a level of sophistication. I think as you go out to pursue outside investment, there's nothing you have to transfer or translate, between converting an LLC to a more grown-up style company. I would say, especially for us, Georgia companies are great. You can have a Georgia company, but structured under really common Delaware law. So anything and everything is possible, but just my 2 cents is go ahead and work through and get the C Corp established. It gives you things like your board, gives you your articles of incorporation and bylaws, just things that, sophisticated investors are going to really want to see as they make their first investment, or as you go out to raise your first fund or first financing.
No, I fully agree with that and so on. But some people do start initially by setting up an LLC because it's very, very cheap to do. And there's a certain amount of compliance, not a huge amount, but a certain amount of compliance that goes with the C Corp.
Thank you. So we're running out of time here, but we do have one more question, and I think it's a good one. And maybe this is a good way to sort of finish things up. What kind of pitfalls do you see early stage founders making when they're approaching investors?
I
Maybe
think a lot of times maybe going very, very early and approaching them when they haven't, don't have any type of validation perhaps of their technology, but also I mentioned a little bit of the lack of preparedness in, their pitch deck, and also not having a plan for financing. They just know that they need money, but they haven't really thought about how much money they need and what is the critical milestone that money is going to get them to. As an investor, you want to be sure that the money you're putting in is going to be relevant and it's going to get them to that critical milestone, and that there's a trajectory for follow-on funding. So I think, just asking for money, kind of pulling a number out of the hat and saying this is what we need without demonstrating a rationale for that, and then a plan, thoroughly to utilize that funding and where that's going to get you. I feel like we see all too often.
Yeah, and sorry, I was just going to emphasize as well that I see particularly companies coming out of universities and so on where, how would I put it politely, where a university says, wouldn't it be nice to have a company? But the reality is that you really need someone that's going to drive it. Certainly, if you're a senior professor, you're not going to leave your tenured position or untenured position for that matter. But if you've got a graduate student or postdoc that wants to drive it, that's willing to get behind it full, but just to start a company around the technology, you've got one, and I would just emphasize what about the importance of doing the background research, of understanding your market, if you can get, and this is one of my pet peeves, is that understanding intellectual property, because particularly in a lot of areas, the areas that I operate in biotech and medical devices and so on, you really need to understand just what the scope of your protection. And it doesn't necessarily mean prosecution of patents, because the universities themselves are nervous about suggesting you're going to get someone on the outside of prosecution, but actually doing IP landscaping to understand who else is in your space and how unique is your product. And similarly doing work on the extending that to who are the competitors, the competitive space. I think is really, so going in prepared, I think is actually, is indicated, is extremely important, and with a full commitment that, you want to be 100% committed to building a company.
Any other comments before we close out here? This was excellent conversation. So I just want to thank everybody for, for being on this panel.
I would say one additional thing in the be prepared, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier with knowing the investor and their investment strategy. Because I have seen folks that, you don't want to be the group that goes to an investor and says, hey, I need $5 million, but they only invest $1 million and have no plan. Because sometimes you get only one bite at the apple, and you don't want people to be turned off from you because you don't know enough about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point. Always do your research.
And going with a range is also bad. It shows a lack of budgeting or a lack of preparedness, to go to an investor and say, I want to get between $5 and $10 million. Well, which is it? Those are very different, right? And sort of having a good plan, I think, shows the level of sophistication that, your investor will have some confidence in your ability to execute on that plan.
Yeah, and I would and understanding where that investment's going to get you. In other words, is this going to get you to a value point that's going to allow your next stage investor to be attracted because you've achieved value points that have further validated the benefit of the technology?
Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. I see there are no more questions from the audience, but this has been a really great discussion. So thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.